Be careful.
Oh dear.
I'm going to mute everybody. We'll do the Pledge of Allegiance, and then Audrey's going to do our invocation and kind of go through a few tidbits of such, and then we'll get to our program because I'm sure it's going to be real interesting today. Some history and some information about the city, Tucson, and how it's evolved over time. So here we go. There we go.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Come on, stop it. There we go. Audrey, if you could unmute yourself.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Let me be awake and see the beauty that surrounds me all around. Let me hear the singing birds make their wonderful sound. Let me be thankful for my health that has been good to me so far. Let all my dreams come true when wishing upon a star. Let me be thankful for friendship that was lovingly given me. Let me never forget the caring that was made for me to see.
Oh, that's nice. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Good words. And couple things. Welcome our speakers here, but also, let's see, who else did I see? Pam's here, but she's, okay, not Pam, Pat's here, but she's hiding relative. UConn and the girls play shortly, so we'll see how that all goes. And my condolences to Sharon, because that was a close and a good game. Yeah, well, so, but hey, they made it quite a way. So I'm waiting to see Baylor and Gonzaga play each other, but we'll see. We'll see how they gotta play the game though to get there. We have road cleanup this Saturday. Meet at the 7-Eleven at 8 a.m. in the morning. After we do that, then we'll go see what we can do to figure out for some fellowship for a little bit of a breakfast. There's a couple, we could go to Finney's, or we can, and that's probably where we'll end up. It'll probably be a little bit easier than trying to get into Bisbee Breakfast Club after that. So
Would
hopefully
you tell me where this 7-Eleven is? I've never participated in this.
It's at the corner of Skyline and Swan. Almost where you, just a little bit south of the entrance to the Skyline Country Club. So 8 o'clock.
Okay.
You'll also see there's a Leadership Institute, has some meetings if people want to attend that in April and May, just some more information to learn about Rotary. And then finally, you probably all saw 100 Years Rotary. There's 3 clubs in the in the district that are 100 years old this year, and the district governor's kind of challenged clubs to try to maybe walk, I think 100 miles it is. We're still in the process of kind of putting that together. I'll put out an announcement in the wagon wheel on Monday as far as if you want to get a t-shirt. I've had 3 or 4 people request t-shirts already, and then I figure we'll get at least a leg up, no pun intended, Al, on our mileage come Saturday when we walk that about 2 or 3 miles along Sunrise. So we'll get a start on some of that mileage to each club kind of walking in support of that. So I'll put some more of that information out, like I say, in the wagon wheel coming up. I think that's probably that's it that I have on the list of things going forward. And I'd like to go ahead and, because this is going to be an interesting meeting, turn it over to Matt, who's going to introduce our speaker, Jim Turner. But a lot of neat stuff about this whole area and community that I think we'll learn a little bit more about, or will leave us maybe asking more questions. So Matt, please take it on. Thanks.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really sorry to have to say that I've never met Jim Turner personally. Certainly looking forward to his talk based on the few minutes we had before the meeting to chat with him. But although I don't know him, I do know this, that if you're a trained historian, then you know something about history. And I know also that if you've worked for the Arizona Historical Society, you know something about history. And I really know that if you're the historian for the Arizona Historical Society, you really know a lot about history. And that's endorsed by Jim Turner's receipt of a couple of very impressive awards. One, the C.L. Sonicson Award for his Journal of Arizona History article in 1998. And then even more impressive, I think, his Distinguished Service Award from the Museum Association of Arizona in 2008. And again, although I don't know Jim personally, I do know of a couple people who know him very well.
Uh-oh.
One is Emily Duell, the executive director of the Oracle Historical Society and Acadia Ranch Museum. I'm going to quote her here a little bit about Jim. She says, "I had the pleasure of first becoming acquainted with Jim Turner during my tenure at the Oracle Historical Society. Time and again, Jim proved himself to be not only an extraordinary scholar, but a one-man lifeline for Arizona's small and underfunded history museums. In this, he served as an invaluable resource on Arizona history and museology, helping to channel resources, provide know-how, and elevate museum standards throughout the state. One cannot fail to be inspired by his generosity and tireless efforts to share unparalleled insights into the realms of historical research and public history interpretation alike." And then one more report on Jim from Jack Lassiter,
Oh, yeah.
professional Arizona history presenter and tour guide. He says, "In Jim Turner, we're very lucky in that we have a presenter who has both the academic credentials, a master's degree in history, and 7 years as historian at the Arizona Historical Society. And more importantly, he is also a wonderfully dynamic presenter who makes history come alive.
Right.
His audiences are often on the edge of their seats in rapt attention. It is a real kick to watch him perform, and if Jim Turner says it, that's the way it happened." So, Catalina Rotarians, hold on to your buckboard seats. Here's Jim Turner.
Thank you, Charles. That's wonderful. And I guess now is the time where I share my screen. Is that how that works? Let's go here. There we go. Now I'm seeing 3 people here. I hope maybe you can.
It should be working fine now. We can hear
Okay,
you. We
great.
can see the big screen. And
All
it's
right,
just,
good.
yeah, everything's going
Excellent,
good.
excellent. So I'll just ignore the fact that I can see. Anyway, this is called Territorial Tucson Heroes and Characters. And I did it for my friend Jeff Ronstadt in person back in November. And of course, I included Federico Ronstadt in that one because you really can't give the talk without that. But this time I've cut it down to 4 characters, I believe, because I'd rather tell you the anecdotes about 4 in the amount of time that I have. So without further ado, we're going to start with one of our town builders, and that would be Sam Hughes. And he's up in the corner here, prematurely bald. I think he's about 28 years old in this picture, and already more hair on his chin than he has on his head. But Sam is a true pioneer, true American pioneer, in that he was, his family immigrated from Wales when he was, I think, 8 years old. And the story goes, the family story goes, that somebody showed his father an ear of corn that was grown in Pennsylvania, and it was so big that the dad says, we have to go there. If we're going to farm, we might as well go where the soil is that rich, that we've got corn that big. Well, Sam had to drop out of school when he was about 14, and his diaries show it. I've had the opportunity because he came to Tucson in 1859 and was one of the original members of the Arizona Pioneer Historical Society before they changed the name. And you had to be in or on your way to Arizona January 1st, 1870, I think, to be qualified to be a pioneer. And the form that they gave you, the biographical form, asked you what means of transportation you used to get to Arizona. And if you said railroad, bam, you're out, because that didn't start till the 1880s. So Sam probably came by covered wagon. I'm pretty sure he did. But he left his home in Pennsylvania to go to the gold rush. And he made his money, what we call, historians call, mining the miners. He opened a tent cafe and made pies and everything that, you know, miners, and they had bags of gold dust, so they were willing to pay $1 for a pie. And he got injured, though, while he was running that. He went out to hunt deer, and he loaded a deer onto his mule, and evidently it wasn't dead yet because it kicked him in the chest. And so he had a little bit of lung problems after that. And once the gold rush sort of died down, this is 1859, and they're starting to get gold in on the Colorado River at Yuma in 57. And so they had heard there was gold in the Tucson mountains, he and several others in a prospecting party. So they showed up in Tucson, but Sam got deadly ill as soon as he got here. And an old Mexican Indian, part Mexican, part Yaqui, nursed him back to health. And she had 2 daughters. And one of them was Athanasia Santa Cruz. And Athanasia, I know she's 3rd generation Tucsonan, or as they say, Tucsonense. And she's a Tucsonense whose grandfather was one of the ones, or maybe the only one, that painted the murals inside Santa Vera del Bac, which was completed in 1796. So her family goes way back, and that was very common in early Tucson because it was so dangerous here that only the men, the adventurers, would show up, and then they, you know, there's no women, Anglo women to marry, so they almost all married Hispanic or Hispanic Indian or what have you. And this is little Lizzie, Elizabeth Hughes, and she married James Corbett, who was the great uncle of Jimmy Corbett, our mayor in 1976, and so on. So, it's wonderful. If you go down to Main Street, you can see the Sam Hughes house, and the Corbett house is next door. And Athanasia's aunt lived across the street, and Sam Hughes's partner married Petra Santa Cruz, and they were all within, 50 yards of each other. And it would be, they'd probably spend the evening and say, well, I'm going home now. And they'd walk across the street. But Sam left a diary. As I said, he left a diary, and it's in one of those old green pages ledger books, because that's pretty much the paper that they had. And maybe they had other stuff, but that's what survived. We're really lucky that they used those old ledger books because they're solid. And he printed, which is very nice, because when I was reading military reports and everything, some of these were officers from very high station families, and they had learned this scroll that is like, I'm rolling through the films hoping that my officer, when I finally get to him, will be one that can write so you can read him. And after a while you get to decipher, but Sam's was block printing. And he was a perfect example of something that Mark Twain once said. And I'm pretty sure I checked on this, because everything Mark Twain said, he didn't necessarily say. So as an editor, I'm always tracking these things down. But Mark Twain said something to the effect that never trust a man who only knows one way to spell a word. Sam was that man. I read his diaries, and there's a wonderful entry when he first gets to Tucson. And that is when he got here, they were living pretty much by the Presidio. We were a walled fort from 1776 until about the 1840s, 1850s. So there, a lot of people are still living within the wall, but they would go out to the Arroyo, which is now Pennington. And the reason it's called Pennington is because it was a very, the Arroyo was there. It was a big ditch, and they put planks across it and made a sawmill right on the Arroyo. But so he went out to the Arroyo to get water in the morning. He'd just gotten there, and he saw these Hispanic women coming out, and they were wrapped in their rebosos, the cloth with only one eye peeking out. And he said they looked cunning like a fox. And in these days, in pre-Victorian era, there was this whole thing about the romantic Hispanic, the Latin race, and how sensual they were. So Sam was really excited about that. But then he told that in honor of his little party, 3 or 4 prospectors, they decided to throw a fandango. And one of the other diaries that I found, who was, she was also 3rd generation, and I think the diary is from the 1840s. And she said, my grandmother told me that when these people came, we welcomed the Americans and their guns, because they followed, the Tucsonans had trouble with Apaches. And so when the Americans came, here were some allies, and there's a Middle Eastern saying that says, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And so the citizens of Tucson welcomed the Americans and their guns. And so they were throwing this big party, and the way they threw a fandango, he explained it. He said they got a band together, and that would be a fife and a fiddle and a big bass guitar, and they would march through the town and lead you to the dance. And they would find a warehouse or an empty building, and they'd clear it out and clean it out and decorate it maybe, and that's where they would have their little dance. And Sam said he was at this dance, and there was a woman there, and she had a lot of pets around her. And one of the pets was a pig, and she had him on a leash. And Sam said, I asked her, I said, your dogs are going to be a lot more dangerous to people. Why do you have the pig on a leash? And she said, I have heard the Americans are very fond of pork. So she wasn't protecting people from her pet. She was protecting her pet from somebody running off with the bacon. And so that was Sam's story. And when he got here, he was a Welshman, and they're known, my grandfather was Welsh. And I know that just like Scotsmen, they're known for pinching a penny till it barks. And so Sam was a businessman. And as I said, in California, he knew to start a tent cafe, because that's where the money was going to be. If you make it easy, you're going to spend it easy. But when he got to Tucson, he opened a store. He got involved with cattle. He got involved with some farming. And when they had kind of a big depression, he didn't get wiped out. He said, I had a spoon in every soup, meaning that he had diversified his investments so that he could keep going. And one of the things that he did was chopped up a gap in the Santa Cruz River. Well, I guess I'm trying to think of about where it might have been. It's not quite to Ajo, but it's upstream. And he chopped a gap in the, I guess it's probably just a little bit north of say, St. Mary's or maybe 22nd Street, but he cut this gap in it, and he didn't understand that that was going to, in flood season, that water was just going to divert itself and go to the lower ground, and it kind of drained the Santa Cruz River at that particular point, but it also scoured out his little irrigation ditch until, well, what they said was it flooded, and then it started eating away. Where it dropped, you had a waterfall, and it just kept eroding and cutting this ditch deeper and wider all the way back to point of water, where the water comes up from an underground spring. And one of the local wags said, Sam Hughes's ditch took a walk about 2 miles upstream. And when it did, we wound up with the Santa Cruz River, which is now, at Congress there. It's what, 30 feet wide and 20 feet deep, or maybe even deeper. But that was as a result of his little handiwork there with the hydrology. He didn't quite understand what was going to happen. But he said his business was building a town. Well, there was a town here already, but he definitely did. He did a lot for the commerce of Arizona, and little Athanasia had 15 children, and about 12 of them, 10 of them lived, and she died at about age 50, and I think she just got wiped out, pretty much gone. But I know Dick Hughes, who's in Realty, if he's still healthy and well. I haven't heard from him for a while, but when the Hughes family has a reunion, it's 50, 70, 80 people. And they were definitely a major part. Sam's brother came to Tucson and became the territorial representative to the U.S. Congress. And so Annie Hughes, there's another one. Annie Hughes, I think it was probably Tom Hughes, started a subdivision about where, well, it's near the courthouse, it's west of the courthouse, and he named one of the streets after his sister, Annie Hughes. And so that was Annie Street, and then it got changed to Anita, and then after the turn of the century, it's called Barrio Anita. And Barrio Anita, one of the old Hispanic neighborhoods, is named after Sam Hughes' sister. I mean, it's just, the mingling was just so obvious, but we kind of forget that, there were pioneers here, and that's what they did. Now, most of the time I debunk the Wild West Buffalo Bill. That's major job here is to tell people it wasn't always like that. It was mostly not like that. It was mostly farmers and doctors and just people trying to make a living and get by. But we did have a stage robber. This is Tucson's most famous stage robber, and we were so lucky to have this picture. I love this picture. The guy's name was Bill Brazelton, and he robbed the stage. The road to Florence, Arizona, kind of paralleled Silver Bell. So as you're going north, that would be the way you would get to, and it kind of hooks up with Oracle Road in a sense. And but it goes through washes, down into the gullies. And this is 1873, if I remember right. And 1873 in February, I think, and they're having to walk the stagecoach down this arroyo because you got to go really slow, and there's a lot of ruts, so you're just sort of taking it very slow. And when they get to the bottom of the wash, this guy steps out from behind a bush with a gun, and he's wearing a flour sack for a mask. And he's been a little creative because he cuts a little piece of red felt and makes a mouth, which you can see here on the mask. There's a little red felt mouth. And so he robs the stage, and they go off to Florence, Arizona, which was bigger than Tucson by that time. And it was for just a little while, and then Tucson got bigger again. But and then 2 weeks later, the stage driver is driving, and he's got a different guard riding shotgun. And he said, well, it was right here where I got robbed a couple of weeks ago. And there's the guy again. And Bill Brazelton again steps behind the bushes, because if it worked once, it'll work twice. And sure as hell, it did. And he robbed the stage again. And unfortunately, he had, as one of the passengers was John Clum, who would eventually become the editor of the Tombstone Epitaphs. So at that time, he was the editor of I think it was the Weekly Star, which had moved its headquarters to Florence for a few years. And he was just outraged that, that the lawmen could not control the robbers in the area. Well, Brazelton was working for a stable downtown, And one of the co-workers was named David something, I can't remember, but David had a place out by a mountain. And Brazelton said, I'm moving in with you and don't tell anybody or I'll kill you. And he was a 6'2" Texan and a bully. And so David didn't tell anybody. And when they went out to track Brazelton, they couldn't find him because he put the shoes on his horse backwards. And that really does work. It's not the only time I've ever heard of. When I first heard it, I said, oh, come on, this isn't, no, but there's another robbery down the Wilcox area where they actually did that. But finally, this guy, David, had enough. And he said, okay, he's out at my place, at my cabin, but you better take him in because, I'm going to need protection after he finds out. Well, they went out there and it was pretty much like a SWAT team. I mean, they went armed for bear. And sure enough, when Brazelton figured out what they were up to, he just started shooting. And I don't know how many types of bullet they found in Brazelton, but after that, they propped up his body in front of the sheriff's office as a warning to other, and we had a series of 3 photographers, a family of father, then son, and then eventually the grandson were photographers. And Henry Buman came to Tucson in 1873, same year as and he took a picture of Brazelton. And this is 2 pictures, actually. You can see he took him a picture with the mask and without the mask. But this is real proof that Tucson had bandits. And not only that, but he became a legend. And we had out in the Tucson mountains, the legend, and it's more of a Hispanic legend than it is Anglo, because they call him El Tejano. And the legend goes that somewhere in the Tucson mountains is a cave, and it has all of the things, the treasures that Brazelton had robbed from these various stage robberies. But if you find it, Brazelton's ghost will appear behind you, over your shoulder, and he will say ominously, todo o nada. Take all of it or take none of it. And it's a parable. It's a lesson to greed. And if you try to take, you can't get all of it. There's just too much to take. So if you try to take any of it, the El Tejano will kill you. So that's the legend of El Tejano. And there's some truth. In fact, it was Bill Brazelton, and he did live out by the Tucson mountains. This is one of my favorite unusual stories, the 7 Sisters of Carondelet. And they came from Missouri by train to San Francisco, then by packet steamer to San Diego, and then by wagon and even walked across the desert out by Gila Bend. And when they got to the Harquahala mining camps, and they're at a stage station, so there's just nobody there. And these miners came in, and they tried to propose to some of the nuns. They had no idea that they were already married to Jesus. But that's the Wild West for you. And Sister Monica Corrigan, who's very young, it doesn't show in this picture, but she's probably 18 and Irish as the day is long. And she wrote a diary, and we still have that diary, and you can find it on, I think, either the U of A website, U of A library website, or I think St. Mary's Hospital has it too, because they came out and founded St. Mary's Hospital in 1870. But she talks about coming by Picacho Peak, and the horses started to get spooked, which usually meant there were Apaches in the area. So she said the soldiers spurred on the horses and hollered and charged. And she was so excited. She wasn't scared. She was just excited by it. And nothing happened. But when they got to Tucson, people celebrated. They were on the rooftops and shooting off guns and fireworks and everything, because they were bringing civilization. They were bringing a hospital to Arizona. And in Sister Monica's diary, towards the end of it, she writes to the other nuns who might come to Tucson, be sure to bring sturdy shoes. Evidently, they were wearing little dance slippers, and they were no good for walking across the desert. So she was very practical about it. And then we have the health seekers, and I'm one of those. We moved to Tucson when I was 2 years old. I was the 8th generation to be born into our house near in Hamden, Connecticut. But everybody moved. My grandfather, my 3 sisters, my mom and dad, we all moved to Tucson because I had asthma. And lo and behold, I definitely outgrew it. And through swimming and exercise and just plain taken care of. And if you get it when you're young, it's a better time. But we had this guy, Oliver Comstock, and he was unusual. We don't have a picture of him in his pith helmet, but he did wear a pith helmet because you're in a hot climate. And he had these mutton chop sideburns, and he rode a bicycle through the tubercular camps. And this is one of the major camp was at Adams Street and Park Avenue. And it took up about a square acre. So right there at Speedway and Park, we had, I don't know, there might have been 30, 40, 50 of these tubercular camps. And they just got to Tucson by rail usually. And they looked so weak that it was said that you could really tell who was tubercular because they were gray, the pallor, and they weighed about 100 pounds or whatever. But Oliver Comstock would ride through the camps with a kettle of soup perched on the handlebars, and he took care of these people. He had been a Baptist minister before he came to Tucson, and they arrived in 1907 with his wife and 10 children, and one had tuberculosis, but they eventually lost 2 because they didn't realize that TB is highly contagious. So there they are interacting with all these TB patients. And so he'd come from Alabama, Southern Baptist minister. He joined the Masons, the Odd Fellows, and any organization that might help him. And eventually he built a hospital right there on Adams Street. And it's still there. I think it's an apartment building now, but it looks kind of like a castle. And I think they call it the castle now. It's at Adams and Park. So you can go there, and it's on the west side, northwest side of the intersection. And he was part of the Tucson City Council. He became a justice of the peace, and he opened the Adams Street Mission in 1909 to take care of the TB patients. And one of the donors that he had was an author named Harold Bell Wright. And Harold Bell Wright wrote plays. He had tuberculosis and came to Tucson for that. Many people thought he had TB, but it wasn't. And not only did he donate, but he put on his plays. And one of his plays was Shepherd of the Hills. And that was written about a preacher who gets sick and has to move to the Ozarks, but he starts a little congregation there. And it was in Branson, Missouri. And so the play first started in Branson, open air. And it is the reason that Branson, Missouri is famous today, because this was around 1910 when they started putting on that play. So he was the donor for Oliver Comstock. And then we have my favorite guy of all Tucson citizens, and that is, he's not the bandit, he's the guy that's holding up his hands, and that's George Smalley. And I had the pleasure of interviewing his daughter, India Smalley Moore, from 1992 to 1994. And she was born in Tucson in 1902, still a territory back then. George came to Tucson for his health, actually came to Arizona for his health in 1896. And the doctor told him to put up a tent by the Arizona Canal in Phoenix. And let's see what it says here. He said, so the property that he bought was right where the Arizona Biltmore is now in Phoenix. If he had kept that land, it would be worth a fortune. But the doctor told him, he said, take a swim in the canal every day and eat a pound of butter every day. And this is long before the Atkins diet. But George did that, and he became a mining reporter. His father had run a newspaper in Minnesota. And so he would write articles about the mines and sell them to the LA Examiner, to St. Louis Dispatch, and San Francisco papers, because people wanted to invest. And he was going out there, even into Mexico, to see if these were phony or if they were real mines. But he also wrote stories about outlaws. And this guy here is Billy Stiles, and he was a lawman, and then he became a stage robber, a train robber, I'm sorry. And so George Smalley, Billy Stiles got arrested in Tucson. They put him in manacles and shackles and dragged him through the streets. And George Smalley was the publisher of the Citizen at the time. And this is 1901. And he said, they really treated him badly. And Billy Stiles escaped by, he said, before we go to jail, can we just stop and have a beer? He got the beer, threw it in the deputy's face, and took off. I'm not making this up. You can read about it in the papers there. But so he's hiding out outside of town, and he wrote a letter to George and said, thank you so much. My mother reads that paper, and she's going to know that I was treated poorly. And if there's anything I can do for you. And George said, well, I'm writing stories about outlaws for the LA Examiner. And so if I could meet you and you could pose for a picture, it would be great. And so there it is. There's art imitating life. This is a real stage robber, and they're faking the holdup. And you can see the grin on Billy Stiles' face. But that's the story of George Smalley. And those are the heroes and the characters of Tucson history. Thank you very much. Okay, now I'll stop sharing. Here we go.
Usually, yeah, all that, and just a few of the heroes that we've seen over the years. That, I mean, that just, yeah, I'm sure you go on and on. Usually we have a little bit of time for people to have some questions or some curiosities. So Steve kind of looks in the chat room, or people raise their hands. So if you don't mind, we'll kind of head in that direction.
Okay, there's Merle.
Merle?
Okay, we had, let's see. Well, we had one question related to Brazelton, and Arturo is asking if Brazelton was alive or dead in those pictures you showed us.
He's dead. He's dead. That's after the ambush. Yep. They're pretty boring when you think about it, but I'll tell you, kids love them. You know, they just think that's, we used to have a museum camp in the summertime, and we bring in these anywhere from 12 to 18, and we'd give them an exhibit hall, and they would gut it out and create an exhibit. And one year they used that picture. Yep.
Any idea if El Tejano's ghost wears the white mask or not?
Nope. I haven't heard anything about that.
Okay, let's see. How large was Tucson in 1901? I guess population-wise and size-wise.
I'm guessing maybe 5,000. It was starting to grow. It was starting to grow. I didn't expect that question, but sometimes I have the numbers right at the top of my head, but I don't right now. But it was a fairly big, it wasn't your one-horse town by that time. I think we'd probably have a grid of about, well, the city limits would have been Stone Avenue on the east, and where the freeway is now on the west, and then all the way over to pretty much the Stone Avenue underpass, about St. Mary's Road would be that end of it. And I think maybe not 22nd Street, but, you know, a little way to the south as well. So it would be like, I don't know, what is that, 20 blocks square or something like that.
Okay, great, thank you. Let's see, BJ asks, of the four main figures you talked about today and perhaps others, are there any common misconceptions or inaccurate information included in the two lore?
Yeah, I didn't do any of those. I should have, but you know, I just went with, there's a problem with Sam Hughes, and that is that he supplied the guns for the Camp Grant massacre. And there was a movement when I was at the Historical Society to take his name off of the Hughes Elementary School, because this is what he did. But at the time, I have a pamphlet that shows it was a memorial to the territorial government saying, here's the number of Apache raids in the Tucson area. Here are the number of people that have been killed by Apaches in the 1870s. And the pamphlet was published, or the memorial was sent to Congress in 1870. And the governor and the troops said, you guys are going to have to fend for yourself. We're not going to do anything for help. So I think it was, at that time, it wasn't unusual for somebody to do something like that. And so, yes, he did that, but he did a whole lot of other stuff too. So I think that's the only one that I can think of where it's controversial. Now, if you get talking to me about John Dillinger, he never stayed at the Congress Hotel. He was not captured at the Congress Hotel. He stayed at a motor court on South 6th, and he was captured at 927 North 2nd Avenue, right by the campus. Two of his men stayed at the Congress, and then in the 1970s, somebody bought the place, or the 1990s, and they decided, wouldn't this be a great way to get a lot of publicity for our hotel? And so that's my one-man campaign against the Dillinger capture.
Okay. Let's see. We had a question from Allison. Oh, you spoke about the Nun's Journal. Is that accessible at the U of A library? Or
Yes, it's the
online,
U of A
or-
library, and it's called Southwest eText, I believe is the name of it. But I think you can just noodle around if you type in, if you go to Sabio, I guess it is, or I'm trying to think of what the name I haven't done any research at the U of A for so long. It's embarrassing because I used to know all this stuff. No, that's the Historical Society one. But if you go to the U of A library reference and do a search for eText, but it used to be called Southwest eText was the name of it, but it's an electronic archive, and it's in there. And I think if you use Sister Monica Corrigan in your search, it'll come up a lot easier. But barring that, just send an email to a reference librarian at the U of A, because it's wonderful. I couldn't give you enough on it in that short time, but you'll be delighted with it. It's just wonderful.
Okay. Let's see. Jeff asks, what's the best way to explore this history now during the pandemic, but then after it all lifts afterwards?
Oh golly, there's so many books. My favorite, I didn't write one on Tucson yet. I keep threatening to do it, but I work for a publisher, and he said I couldn't sell enough of them anywhere else. So I wrote my second edition of my Arizona history book is going to be coming out in June. We just got it back from the designer, and it's going to the printer. But my favorite Tucson history book is by C.L. Sonicson. And thank you for pronouncing his name correctly. People just usually stumble over that. Must be from Minnesota, just like he was. But C.L. Sonicson, and I think it's called the story of Tucson, the story of a desert metropolis, or something like that. But his name is spelled Sonnichsen. And also, email me, jimturnerhistorian@gmail.com. I have a bibliography in the back of my Arizona history book that will give you, and it's separated by Spanish history, by Apaches, by Tombstone of all things. And then there are general history books, but Sonicson's book is my favorite. And I don't think anybody has come out with one that is as detailed as his. And that's where I got a lot of these stories, because he went to those diaries and he left a trail. He got all these footnotes. So when I wanted to find the residents of the Tucson Presidio, he'd already tracked them down, and I knew exactly what to ask for at the Arizona Historical Society. You can also go to the reading room and ask for those documents. Once you get the Sonicson book, then you can look in the back and see, where his footnotes are come from. And then you can go to all of those books, because there's another one. Hank Dobbins wrote one about Spanish Tucson. Oh, and Hispanic Tucson is, it's Tom Sheridan, Professor Thomas Sheridan, and it's called Tucsonensis. And it is the history of Hispanic Tucson. So any of those, you got a lot of reading to do.
Thank you for that. Merle asks, who were the Wetmores of Wetmore Avenue?
Golly, they're really, I've learned and forgotten, but basically a ranch family out on the river there, and they built a swimming pool. And in the summertime, you could watch movies from in the pool in the 1930s and 40s. It was about the only public pool we had. And so, and they had a slide. I know that they had a big water slide, but otherwise they weren't really, it's just Wetmore Road would be, well, that's where Mr. Wetmore lived. Like Swan Road is actually named for a homesteader, Mr. Swan. Craycroft is named after a civil engineer for the city, a very dour Scotsman. And some of the street names were named after men killed by Apaches. Pennington, Stone, and a number of others were named after Kennedy. And you can find something in the city council where they decided to do that. I forget where it is now, but it's in one of the books that I've got that will lead you to that newspaper article that says, and I think we're the only town in the United States that has streets named after pioneers killed by Apaches. I don't know who else would do that. Okay. How can we get Jim's book? Well, it'll be coming out soon. My first edition of my Arizona history book went out of print in December of 2016. And I have a few copies, but they're secondhand, slightly used, whatever. They might have an inscription in them, but they're perfect. But the new one will be coming out. And I would hope that you would contact me, because I get a percentage. I can buy them and I will deliver it right to your house. But it'll be on Amazon, and it'll also be, or you can order it from rionuevo.com, Rio Nuevo Publishers. I don't know if it's what their address is, but Rio Nuevo Publishers, if you Google Rio Nuevo Publishers, you'll be able to order it there. And my boss would like that, but your best bet, and I'm hoping it'll be in Barnes and Noble. The boss doesn't like to do that. I won't get into that. But my first one was in Costco like 2 years in a row, and I was just thrilled. And I had signings at Barnes and Noble, and that's like, oh my gosh, I'm a real author. I got signings at Barnes and Noble. But we'll see what happens. But I know that they're going to be, and we distribute to, we're a book distributor as well. So you'll be able to get it probably at Tohono Chul, and a number of other places where we have all these clients, and it'll be in Tubac and Tumacacori and every place where we have a client, they're going to want to carry this book. And so, or like I say, email me and I'll tell you when it comes out, or I can email you guys and say, okay, the book's on the stands now, go get it. Here's where it is.
Okay, great. I have a couple more questions in chat.
Okay, we got a, she wants to know, what's my email? jimturnerhistorian@gmail.com. But if you forget it, just go to Google and type in Jim Turner Historian, and guess what pops up? My website, which is jimturnerhistorian.org. So I don't think you can miss me. You know, the first time I ever typed in Jim Turner Historian in Google and my name popped up as the first hit, I thought, I am #1 on Google.
All righty, we had a couple more questions, Jim. Arturo asks if you could describe what, back in the territorial days, what the landscape and vegetation was like back then. Yeah, he says he heard that water flowed in the Santa Cruz.
It flowed better than it does now, but it didn't flow continuously. And the legend was that they were riding steamboats on the Santa Cruz. So this photographer came out, Watson, I think his name was, and he was going to get pictures of the steamboats. But yes, it was pretty much the same. I did a history of floods in Tucson for the Pima County Flood District. They were having their 40th anniversary flood control district. And so I wrote about the 1904 flood and a number of others. And it was, it's pretty much the same vegetation. If you go back 2,000 years ago, that's when it changed to what it is now. We had some major droughts in the 1880s that really cemented what we have now. But yes, the water table was lower. I wrote some labels for a park right down on across from the art museum on Main Street, I believe it is, just south of the county courthouse. And there's this little pocket park called Centennial Park, and it does a history of water. And when the Spaniards were here, the water table was 7 feet below the ground. So digging a well was no problem whatsoever. But over the years, it's been a lot of pumping, a lot of irrigating, and plus a lot of runoff. As I said, this gouging of the arroyos is what really did a lot of it. Another thing that happened was they chopped down all the mesquite trees along the Santa Cruz to run the flour mills because they had steam powered flour mills, and they went through a lot of wood. And once you chop down the mesquite trees, then when it floods, you get all that runoff, and it just takes the soil away, which would normally. So yeah, we had a lot more filling the water table. And as I said, the Santa Cruz was flat, but it started to change right about the time that Sam Hughes's ditch backed up, 1906. So that would be when it started to change. And I don't think it's anything recent other than a whole lot of water usage that's pumping this stuff out of the ground, you know. And so we got a lot more people here and not enough water supply for the number of people that we have.
Okay. We have one more, I think, from Sharon, and she was wondering if you could describe the role of Fort Lowell.
Oh, absolutely. Fort Lowell was here to chase after Apaches. And it originally, the soldiers moved in 1864. And I should tell you about a man named, oh golly, how could I forget his name? Just George Hand. George Hand wrote 3 diaries. And we have George Hand's Civil War diary. He was here in 1864 and is mostly complaining about the officers and how they get away with everything. And he's an enlisted man, so he gets stuck for coming back to the fort drunk and such things. But the fort was where Armory Park is now. That's where the original Fort Lowell was, and it was on the edge of Tucson. But one of the soldiers got drunk and shot Old Man Pennington's dog. And that's the legend of why they moved the fort. But the townsfolk said the soldiers were corrupting the citizens, and the officers said, well, you guys have all these saloons and you're corrupting the military. So they moved them 7 miles out of town, about 1873, I believe. But they went from there. They actually went up into the Catalinas and chased after a couple of cattle thieves that had been to the mouth of the Sabino Creek. And, but yeah, there were still Apache problems, and they would go south from there. And one of my favorite things about Fort Lowell was in the 1880s, I believe it was, they were big enough. They were a major fort. Fort McDowell and Tucson were 2 of the major forts, and they were kind of a hub where you would go from there to Fort Huachuca, or you would go from there to Fort Apache or whatever. So it was more of a depot than maneuvers. But they were big enough by the 1880s to have a military band. A whole unit of their camp was a military band. And by this time, it was safe enough. The railroad had come, and almost everybody except Geronimo had surrendered. So they had this band, and the band leader brought his family along with him. And his little boy was there, and they had been stationed in Prescott, which had been the territorial capital, and there was a big fort there. But the little boy who stayed in Tucson when he was 8 or 10 years old grew up to be the mayor who read the funny papers to the kids over the radio during the Great Depression. Viorello LaGuardia grew up in Tucson and in Prescott because his father was the bandmaster. And Walter Reed was also stationed here. He went on to cure yellow fever, but he was another celebrity at Fort Lowell.
Wow, nice. Okay, I don't see any other questions. So back to you, President Paul.
Jim, thank you. I was able to post your Gmail account in the chat room for
Oh,
everybody,
great.
so they got that. Thank you, thank you. I mean, this place is just full of it. I mean, from history perspective.
And so am I.
No, fun to listen to. All
Somebody just mentioned Paul Hutton's book about Apaches, and it is the best thing out there right now. There's another one that's very good, but Paul just covers it. I needed to know something about Apaches the other day, and I've got his book. I met him at conventions and at the book festival, and so he's a dogged scholar. I mean, if you read it from Paul, it's true. And it's extensive. I mean, everything is there, plus the footnotes. So if you want to know more about one particular Apache, you can do it. And he uses the military records and everything else. So that is the definitive book on Apaches right now.
traces things back. So as you probably Rotary is big into polio and prevention, so we will donate for 10 folks to get inoculated against polio in honor of your discussion today. Thank you for being here. I know there's probably a lot more people would like to hear, but you've given us a lot of different opportunities to go look at things and
Sure.
chase stuff down. So.
And if you belong to any other clubs that need a speaker, I do live. I just got my second inoculation, so I do live or I do the Zoom thing.
Yeah,
So,
so but appreciate things. We're going to go ahead and move on to a couple other things for the meeting. You're welcome to stick around or
no,
Zoom
I'm going
away.
to take off, have my lunch.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
I appreciate it. It was very informative.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks. As far as Sergeant today, I was looking at the wagon wheel. Let's see. Dick Carlson's birthday was earlier this week, but I don't see him on here. So is Jack Aaron. Actually, Jack Aaron's is tomorrow. I can wait for Mr. Kester until next week. I saw him on here. Or you can, we'll just wait until next week. Make sure, you have a good celebration. I hope you're doing well. Let's see. And is anybody celebrating anything special? Let's see. Andrew, I saw had an anniversary. I saw BJ had an anniversary last week. So I was gonna say, are there any other happy bucks or funds or good things you want to promote? Joan.
I'll give 20 in honor of my new
Puppy. Thank you. I thought I saw Andy unmute, but then he muted.
I'll unmute. Okay, I would like to find everybody but the women that have red shirts on for the Wildcats tonight, if I can find them. It's only the women have red shirts on.
All right.
Well, I guess the UConn game's tonight, huh?
See what?
So Pat's kind of in between. Okay. Did you have something, Andy?
I'm not up on this. Who does red honor?
The
Is that a
U of A
wild-
girls, they're playing basketball tonight.
I
Final
followed that. I didn't know the color scheme.
What?
I'm not from here, you know.
Okay.
Everything's red.
I'm going to send in some happy bucks. We had our granddaughter here for the last 10 days.
That's great.
Happened to bring her parents along. So I'll throw in some happy bucks for that.
Okay. Okie dokie. Anita, yes.
Oh, well, I was just, I'm just glad they said something about the shirts. I was going to toss in some money because I'm just so proud of the team and Adia and everything. So, and it's very exciting. So hope you all watch it this evening.
Okay.
We will.
Okie dokie. Anybody else? Okie dokie. Oh, Michael, yes.
I got some happy bucks. I took, the sergeant missed it last week when you called on me and I was driving in the car home from San Diego. I thought that the sergeant was going to get me for that, Matt. You missed me. But
Hopefully you were able to get out of the car and do something over there.
yeah, the whole family listened to the meeting in the car ride, you know. There's really nothing else on the 8th, so everyone listened to the meeting last week, so we had a good time. So I'll throw in some money for that.
Okay.
Good.
We recognize Linda Walsh, Pete's wife.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I sent out a notice to everybody last night, and yeah, as we heard about it last week. So yes. Couple other things. Just when you have your pocket change, realize that in 1792 the U.S. Mint was created. And also on this day in history in 1956, both As the World Turns and The Edge of Night debuted. And I think one of them is still around. And finally, if you need a sandwich tonight, have a PB&J because it's PB&J day today. Say that. Yeah, that'd be perfect for Andy if you've got your grandkids with you. So.
President Paul, could I
Yes.
butt in just briefly?
Sure.
I for those of you, I know we're a day past April Fool's Day, but I learned about a great April Fool's Day prank that the BBC pulled in 1957. And if you Google BBC April Fool's spaghetti, you'll learn how they convinced a whole lot of people that spaghetti grew on trees.
Thank you, Steve. I was going to say, also there was a funny one about dachshunds and Australian police or something like that yesterday about a new type of a search and retrieve animal, and they were actually they called them sausage. Was the acronym that they came up with. It was kind of cute for yesterday. So next week we've got Yoto, and then a week from tomorrow we will be doing road cleanup. And then this is just one little fun tidbit to kind of wrap things up about Arizona. Almost everyone in the world knows something about Arizona, and some of it is even true by our speaker, Jim Turner. And I thought he was great. I'm sure we could have him back and we could learn all kinds of things about this place. It is amazing with its history. I heard everybody over 16 is opened up for shots now. So no excuse for not getting your shots and getting your second one. And then CDC says you can travel now too. They just came out, so like for the grandparents to see the grandkids and so on like that. So be safe. Look forward to getting closer and being able to see each other in person here coming around the turn. So be good, everybody. We'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Paul.
Thanks.
Let's go ahead and touch.